I'm sure that there is there are targets that you've set for Akasa, targets that you intend to hit by the end of the year, and then of course there is a 5-year plan as well. But just specifically for this year, because as you launch with the 2 aircraft that you're launching with, I would imagine that this is sort of pilot mode for you, and there will be learnings that you take away from this as you scale up. So what are the targets that you've set out for yourself, at least for this particular year is concerned?
So Shirin, I think the main aspects of our target are focused on our employees and our customers. I think the profitability will follow. And the reason the profitability will follow is because what we have been working on...
What's the timeline for profitability?
Look, these are things that we just don't make public. As you can imagine, we've got very detailed spreadsheets and those numbers are in my head, but we just don't put them out. I'm sorry, it's just not something that will come out of my mouth.
Okay, how much capital are you starting with? I mean, Rakesh has said 50 million is what he's bringing to the table. You've got a bunch of other investors on board as well. So what are we talking about?
We do. I'll tell you that one of the one of the aspects of learning that I've had is to ensure that you have a well-capitalized business. And again, you're not going to get numbers from me, Shirin, sorry about that, but we are well-capitalized at this point, and we're incredibly thankful for our investors, for all of them, Rakesh, of course, but the other investors as well, because without them, we would not be able to go down this path of fulfilling our dreams of launching Akasa. So we're just eternally grateful. We're well capitalized. Our focus really is on launching a good solid airline with happy employees and happy customers. The aspects of profitability we've been working on for 2 years. As you asked Aditya the question of how do you set up this cost structure, Aditya was mentioning, there's no one answer to that. So we worked on our aircraft contract, we worked on our engine contract, we worked on our leasing contract, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So at this point where we're launching the airline, a large part of our cost structure is already in place. In fact, 99% of our cost structure is already in place, which is why I'm not being coy when I say we're focused on the customer and the service and the employee satisfaction aspects of it, because we've spent the last 2 years working on our cost structure.
Okay, since we're talking about cost structure, Aditya, I wouldn't say bad behavior, but there's been unhealthy behavior, which is also responsible for where we find Indian aviation today, whether it's pricing and so on and so forth. You've got a clear market leader with 60% share at this point in time. As you design your fare strategy specifically, what are you mindful of? I mean, you're starting small, but the aspiration is to scale up and scale up fairly quickly. So how are you going to, what does that feed into as far as the fare strategies is concerned, and especially with a focus on realization?
I think in terms of strategy, whether it is fares or whether it is the cost structure or significant elements of the cost structure, at least my learning has been that the airline business is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So when you are looking at sort of, taking certain decisions, and you mentioned some of them, by and large, you have to be nimble, you have to be agile, but by and large, if you take short-term decisions, whether it is to pump up the revenue side or the load factor, or whether to suddenly cut costs in some pocket or the other, it comes and fractures the business overall. As I said, not to take away from being nimble, agile, knowing when to kind of, dodge and wave. Now, as far as the fare structure is concerned, we want to be at market. But again, maybe, Vinay might have a slightly different view on this, because we are after all 2 different individuals. I have always been more cost focused as opposed to what's happening on the fare side, right? Because by and large, everybody's fare sits around the same spot, but whoever's cost structure is lower is finally the one who makes money. But are we going to go crash fares to necessarily disrupt the market? I don't think so.
No, is that not part of the strategy, or is that part of the strategy?
No, Shirin. I mean, these are there's differences between strategy and tactics. As Aditya was saying, from a strategy perspective, in the long run, we want to be affordable, but affordable is relative to what's being offered out in the market. the 1 rupee, 5 rupee, 10 rupee. Look, these are more tactics than strategy. I'm not going to tip my hand in terms of when tactically we'll use one thing here or one thing there. We may, but in the long run, our aim is to be, at market.
Salil, I want to understand from you what the current order book is looking like for the India business, and is it challenging given the global uncertainties? Do you worry about being able to fulfill the orders?
Look, so at this point, the current order book for India is extremely healthy, as we know, with 72 aircraft just with Akasa alone. We still have, of course, our major customer in SpiceJet for 737 MAX with 145 orders. We have wide-body orders from Vistara, and we know that the folks at Tata and Air India have talked about placing large orders as well in the future. But we recognize that around the industry, and in all industries, right, the supply chain is something coming out of the pandemic that continues to need to be worked. And we have been very realistic about the rates that we have announced and how many aircraft we are manufacturing and delivering. And we do that so that we can meet the commitments that we give customers like Akasa. Because if we miss those commitments, we recognize there are operational consequences for the airlines. And so we never want to be in a position where a customer has sold tickets and they can't operate the aircraft because they didn't get the aircraft on time. So we're being very cognizant of those limitations in the overall industry and in the supply chain when we give a schedule like the one we give to Akasa.
There's a lot that's in your control on the cost side, but then there's a lot that's not in your control, especially on the ATF front. Today, price is just a little below 100. The hope and the expectation is that they may hold here. If they don't, and it's back up to 100 plus, in the near term, how does that change plans for you? Yeah,
so Shirin, we hope Brent comes down to $40 a barrel, but
doesn't everyone?
As my mentor and the CEO of Delta said many times, hope is not a strategy.
Yes.
So for us strategically, we have chosen what is the world's most fuel-efficient aircraft. We have the youngest, greenest fleet, which means that not only do we have the advantage of the aircraft we've chosen, but we've also got the advantage of age. As Aditya had mentioned, on top of that, you add processes and procedures of how you operate the aircraft that can again get you a few points of advantage there. So I'd say that while we're hoping for lower fuel, where we've planned our business such that even if fuel is higher, we at least competitively will be well placed.
What have you planned it at? At 100, 100 plus?
These go when we started the airline. The first spreadsheet of mine came out in August of 2020. Fuel was at 40, and then we planned it at 50 and 60 and 70, and it's over 100 today. So as far as fuel planning is concerned, there's no sort of static number. This is something that's very dynamic and goes up and down. But like I said, for us, the focus is to ensure that we are the most fuel-efficient carrier in India, which gives us a competitive advantage.
Okay, let me ask you, how involved is Rakesh with planning, strategy? Is he hands-on at all, or is he sort of the passive investor?
Yeah, no. So I would describe Rakesh, and I'll preface it by saying, I have not been personally exposed to 20 different, investors because I have not incubated many businesses. This is the first business that, I have been involved in incubating. But when I imagine the perfect investor, and the qualities and where they're involved and where they're not involved, where they provide guidance and advice and where they let the professionals do, what professionals have been trained for over 20, 30 years, my view is Rakesh, but Rakesh and his team, Utpal, Ushma, Amit, I would describe them to be the perfect investor. Sort of in my mind, what I had built up to be the perfect investor, this is the way it's playing out. He's perfectly sort of proportionately involved in matters that he thinks that are necessary, where he can push. And where it's very aviation and technical, he lets us do our thing.
Aditya, let me end by asking you, So Vinay called you, and then Rakesh called you as well, and that brought you back to aviation.
That's exactly right. Vinay called me in August of 2020, and I was like, I remember it was the middle of the afternoon. We are in lockdown, we're in nothing to do.
And probably in the gym.
I was close.
or eating.
Or eating. And I was like, yeah, wow, what a fantastic idea. And of course, Vinay is much more calm. So he says it's going to be difficult. I said, I know, but it's such a great idea. So we had a conversation. At that time, my father was unwell, so couldn't sort of, And then a few months later, Ushma actually calls me from, who's Rakesh's colleague, and says, we want to talk to you about something. Do you mind if we get onto a call? I said, yeah, sure. And I've known them for a while. And then they talk about this airline idea. I said, hey, is this Vinay's idea? So they said, yeah. So I said, look, in the interest of full disclosure, Vinay has spoken to me about this. So you better check with him. He said, yeah, that's, Rakesh now jumps into the call. I didn't know he was on the call. He jumps in and he's like, in this thing, basically asked me whether I'm interested. And then I said, yes, but check with Vinay. So the call ended with, we'll get back to you in a few days. Sure, of course we'll check with Vinay. Phone rings 5 minutes later saying, Vinay's on.
I was jumping with joy. They could have thrown any name at me. And they chose to throw, Aditya, who, I called, the minute I thought of this, it was, you think of the idea, then you think who you want to do it with. Yeah. That's the sequence of events well before the business model. Because these kind of things you just don't do alone. You need, literally hundreds of people. And so, of all the names that could be thrown at me, it was Aditya, and I was like, yes, thank God, there's someone looking over me, literally.
Well, gentlemen, we wish you the very best of luck. Thanks very much for joining us here, and we hope to check in with you when the launch happens, and then, of course, hopefully more details by then.
We hope to see you flying on us.
Yes, on Akasa.
I hope to be flying as well, but thanks very much for your time. Appreciate you joining us here on The Record.